You're watching day 3 of Hearthstone Grandmasters here in the first week of our second season of 2020. So it's again the perfect time to join. We're finding out who's going to be getting that top spot for a full 6 points, putting themselves in great standing once the round robin comes about. And two players who are vying for that spot right now, Che0nsu and Tyler, both of whom I have very, very high expectations of. And even though I think that they have kind of different stories as to how they got here, their history throughout Hearthstone, I think their strengths very much actually line up as two players because, in my opinion, they are two players who have to really grift and grind to get up to that top level of competition. And I think both players have absolutely been doing that. The results speak for themselves, both on ladder and now that we're here with a successful first week.
That's right. Che0nsu was posting rank 1 after finish on the Asia ladder. Tyler, of course, spending hour after hour streaming and testing all of the decks in the new expansion. And Che0nsu, I have to say, out of everybody that we've seen on stream so far, I feel like he's been looking the most confident in his plays, and the results speak for himself. I've just loved to see that improvement in Che0nsu even between this season and last.
Absolutely. He's one of the players who I think, we had a couple of moments of doubt. I was a non-believer at one point, I will freely admit, especially when we compare it to how high some of the skill level was of some of the other players that we were looking at. Obviously, Japan dominating last season, Surrender having year after year of strong performances. But now, as I'm saying again and again, as I'm sure I will continue to do so as the season carries on, I love what I'm seeing from Che0nsu. And it's not only in his play, it's also in his lineup. As we see here, he's gone with the slightly more controlled version of the decks, with omitting the aggro rogue, the tempo mage that we've seen from a lot of people, and instead going with, in addition to the almost obligatory priest and druid, control warrior and control demon hunter.
Yes, and these two decks are pretty good at preying at the other two most common brings, which are mage and rogue, at least in APAC. And I think that's a large part where Che0nsu performed so well, going 5-2 in the Swiss portion, and then going undefeated, at least in terms of series, leading up to this point. And Tyler does have a rogue of his own. No mage, but that weapon version maybe has a little bit more gas to it still, compared to, say, the build that Glory had, which was on Stealth Minion. So even though I feel like Che0nsu's lineup has a good chance against rogue, this particular build of rogue Tyler, I feel, has the best shot amongst all the others.
It's been looking very strong, and I think he's shown great aptitude with the deck as well. It's for an aggro deck. I've had a surprising number, to me at least, a surprising number of questions about how the overall macro game plan should be formed. I've been thinking about going for like early secret passages for less value, just to find the self-sharpening swords, but thinking back on it as I was reminiscing of the games after we were finished yesterday, I think generally Tyler just has the right idea of the deck. He's not going overly greedy with his play, but he's also understanding what the reason that you're playing the weapon package overall in the deck is. So I think he should be in a good spot to take a win with the rogue, even against the control decks from Che0nsu, some of which are pretty interesting builds, I've got to say.
Yes, it's also worth noting, though, that Tyler's ban strategy has been pretty consistent throughout the tournament. I think he's been banning Priest as a priority most of the time and only banned Warrior once. It seems like it's become kind of a question for these people that are bringing at least Rogue. And if you do have Rogue plus Mage, I feel like many of our have defaulted to banning Warrior before Priest. But Tyler having just the Rogue and a Warrior of his own has been banning Priest more consistently, probably because it has a better shot against Warrior. His opponent in Che0nsu, we saw a cool little graphic there. Che0nsu's been absolutely killing it with his Druid play, 8-2 in game score so far.
Yeah, I mean, they've both been doing very, very well on their respective Druid decks. And I think this is, for the moment at least, the thinking of most of the players. It's Druid isn't generally strong enough against specifically any of my decks. It's just generally powerful. It will likely win the majority of the games that it's playing because it is an incredibly powerful archetype at the moment, incredibly powerful class, no matter which version of Druid you are playing. So you just kind of have to eat up the loss. You can go with Tyler's game plan of going for a bit more aggressive with the rogue that he's got in there, in order to try and get underneath everything that the Druid is doing. Or you can go for Che0nsu's strategy, which has proven, I think, to have real game against Druid, where he goes for just the control archetypes and hopes to get the win by fatiguing the Druid.
And while we could talk about the different ways to get around Druid with different classes, we are going to start off with a good old-fashioned mirror. And Che0nsu's list is not the weirdest Druid list we've seen. I think it's fair to say Possessy stuck out to me as having the most cards I wouldn't expect to see. But Che0nsu's Beast package is only running 4, so 2 Twilight Runners and 1 each of the Lake Thresher and Teacher's Pet. And he has made room for Living Dragon Breath. Not going to be too useful.
Yeah, I think if we had to really fault Che0nsu on any lineup decision, it would have to be that, which is not to say that it's a bad decision necessarily. It was just a bit of a misread. He didn't quite correctly anticipate the number of majors that there would be. And I think you could also argue that's kind of a fault with his lineup in general, because he has a very anti-aggro version of decks, and then, of course, Mage is not that highly represented in APAC. Whereas if he was playing in Europe with every single player bringing Tempo Mage, I'm sure he'd be a lot happier with that.
Yeah, and it's really hard to make those kind of reads going into week 1 of a new expansion, and being the first region as well to play on stream. You can really struggle to find any information early on. But despite that one card being not the greatest inclusion for this matchup for Che0nsu, he has gotten a great start with that nature study into the overgrowth, and now has the ability first guardian animals if he so chooses.
And this is the interesting point, right? We've seen this go back and forth with the players about how and when you're throwing down your guardian animals here. A lot of times, players holding them back deliberately because they don't want to have their board cleaved out of existence. Did you believe this to be one of those times, or is it just go in and start getting the attacks on board?
I think it's absolutely right to go in here, because Tyler had not gone for any ramp that turn. It was kind of unlikely for Tyler to be able to respond right now with guardian animals. Right. It would have to be that in hand plus lightning bloom plus the coin. Asking for that combination, I think, is not too likely. And especially since Che0nsu has the follow-up of second guardian animals, I think it's absolutely right that he just goes in here.
Kind of a cute play here as well by Tyler, getting the tree enforcements down first to get the mana reduction off of the nature studies. I think it's kind of worth talking about here that for Che0nsu, he very possibly mispositioned his minions here, because he could have put the stealth in the middle, which would have meant that there's no way to target all 3 at the same time, and he is getting directly punished for this mistake.
Yeah, that is a good catch. The Anubis defender could have gone on the far left there, and even though Tyler did have the response to what I was saying was not the most likely outcome for Che0nsu, Che0nsu does have his own response, and he's guaranteed to get his own Lake Thresher because he does run that streamlined 4 Beast package. And now if we're talking about positioning, I don't think Tyler could have really played around this, because the taunt that he has in the middle was generated by his guardian animals.
Yes. It was not entirely play-aroundable, but he could have just ameliorated the situation that little bit.
Che0nsu just going to take some clean trades here, and I like that he puts his taunt minion into the Teacher's Pet there. Even if you generate a taunt off the Teacher's Pet, then the Lake Thresher can still get the cleave, and it's likely that you want to save more health on your Lake Thresher.
And I know I'm already being very, very nitpicky here about Che0nsu's gameplay, but if I'm touting him as my champion for the season, I've got to be keeping up on him. I think he misordered in terms of killing the Elic there. I think you'd rather shuffle an Ironbark into your opponent's deck, because that's kind of a bad draw. Basically, anything that isn't card draw or a big Kael'thas or anything like that. That one's a little bit more debatable, for sure.
Worth noting at this point, but the action is not slowing down whatsoever. Che0nsu with the Ghidra overgrowth can even heal back up his Twilight Runner. I think it's lights out for Tyler.
Yep, and I think, this was the heart of this game, right? The only real strong decision outside of the Elic, which I was talking about, is Che0nsu as to whether or not he goes for Guardian Animals into Guardian Animals, which I was talking about sometimes you hold back on, because there can be the punish of the Lake Thresher killing off your Twilight Runner. But for Che0nsu there, because he had the play of Guardian Animals into Guardian Animals, on average, it was worth it, I think, to lock down that board, as he so cleanly demonstrated in that game.
And quite a fortunate outcome that the first Guardian Animals didn't pull his Cleaver, because I think you'd much rather have the Lake Thresher as to your opponent's responding Guardian Animals. Well, even though the shape of Druid has kind of changed compared to last season, I think the explosiveness of the matchup definitely still rings true. So that's the first game already in the books. You did mention, though, that with Druid, you kind of expect to get a loss against it at some point, just because the deck as a whole seems to be on a higher power level most of the rest of the meta. So I don't think that Tyler should be feeling too sad about that just yet.
We'll have to see. He's going to have to get a win with it if he wants to turn this series around. And I believe when we come back after this break, he's going to be lining up against Che0nsu's Warrior, which we've seen go okay so far for the Warrior. Kind of a close matchup. Very excited to see how that one will shake out and if Che0nsu can secure this out for his spot in the finals. Don't go anywhere. You'll be able to find out after this. You're watching Che0nsu versus Tyler here in APAC Grandmasters. Our first match of the day and the first match of the entire day's broadcast. We're going to be bringing you all the action from our semifinals and finals before we send you over to Europe to do the same, and then Americas at the end of the day to follow us all up. Been a long couple of days, but hopefully with a little less game time per day. Be a little bit more digestible today, we can hope. But for Che0nsu at least, here in the APAC region, we're moving on at a nice clip with a blisteringly fast Druid mirror going in his favor. Tyler now has to try and line up once again his Druid to take a win over Che0nsu's Bomb Control Warrior. It's a kind of interesting build of the deck from Che0nsu. A lot of one-offs in there, but I guess the main core of the deck of just control and removal is still the same.
Yes, it's definitely intact. I think the most notable inclusion that you might not see in other warriors is the Magtheridon in there for Che0nsu. That card, especially since it also makes an appearance in the Control Demon Hunter. And over in later in the day, we'll see Bank Yugi's warrior most likely, which is running Zephyrus. And I feel like if Che0nsu is going to be running many of those one of. It might be interesting to see him include that as. Oh, sorry, my mistake. There is a Zephyrus in here.
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's nearly Highlander Warrior for Che0nsu. And I feel like at the cost of consistency, he does give himself a little bit of capability to deal with everything. And we did see Che0nsu take a win over Druid last time he was on stream with this warrior, which I would call a win in an unfavorable matchup. So he clearly also knows just how to execute the game plan.
Yeah, I'm a decent fan of his list here. I think the one Bomb Warrior list that I really haven't so much liked the look of specifically for this metagame was the very light version of the deck. I believe it was Possessi was piloting that one, that didn't have the extra Horde Pillager or Dr. Krastinov or Zephyrus or Grom. You don't have to have all of them. You just, I think, want to have a little bit of extra oomph to close out the mirror and the non-aggro matchups.
No matter what expansion we're in, it still remains true that Wallet Warrior is a deck. Tons of legendaries that can fit.
Yeah.
And Dr. Krastinov, even Rattlegore make appearances in lists in other regions. But he remains to be seen whether Che0nsu can put together the answers for the big beasts that Tyler has. And Tyler, notably, in his Druid list, is also running the exotic Mount Seller. Just one copy, but one copy is alone enough to be another wave of threats.
Yeah, it's a bit of a weird one, isn't it? Because he is running the Mount Seller, as you said, but he hasn't got very many cheap spells in the deck. He's not running Moonfire, he's not running Crystal Powers, similar to what Blitzchung was playing yesterday, where he was pretty all in on the Mount Seller package, completely cutting the survival of the fittest stuff. And I'm still not necessarily convinced on the hybrid package from Tyler, but for this matchup in particular, the Mount Seller, I think, is going to be a very, very welcome addition.
Yep. And it probably indicates why he's only running one copy is because he didn't want to run too many of those cheap spells, which can make for dead draws in Druid every so often. It's just really cool to see all the different takes on these lists in this kind of unrefined part of the meta cycle.
Well, here we go.
Actually, just ripping that first Mount Seller right away. Picked up that partner assignment pretty quickly. I was pretty heavily considering the Lightning Bloom just to get Ysera down next turn.
Yeah, I think I don't mind going for it this order because it's extra value, first of all, which is pretty nice. But he has the pretty spicy combo of being able to go Twilight Runner this turn, or turn 8, and then Ysera and immediately draw to try and get a couple of extra dragons out to get that consistent pressure going.
That's true. Should the Twilight Runner stick, which is not 100% because of Bladestorm Brawl, etc., but it is definitely worth considering.
Yes.
I also want to note Tyler's Beast generation are insane. This Zixor will put yet another wave of his deck in the form of the Prime, and also just the Bloated Python as a Death Rattle minion makes it kind of annoying for Warrior to deal with.
I mean, even the Beasts in hand, I'm thinking a little bit late game already here, but Augmented Porcupine with Survival of the Fittest, or maybe even 2 Survival of the Fittest put on there. That's a free Pyroblast right there when it dies.
Pretty crazy. And Che0nsu, not to mention, this turn he just doesn't have a way of dealing with the Mount Seller that I can see. He could start fishing with Shield Block, but Sword and Board is a little bit short with the Weapon Swing as well. It could very well just be a Shield Block type turn. He is pulling out the Ankar guaranteed because both Reg Caliber were either played or in hand.
And this is where things get... I start to have questions a little bit about Che0nsu's game plan so far here, because he kept the Shield Block as the only card in his mulligan. And maybe on average you feel like you have time to play it before these turns roll around. But, you know, there's quite a lot of early cards in the deck. You're playing out Corsair Cache, you're playing your weapons, you're playing Sky Raider, Evil Quartermaster as well. I think it was quite reasonable to throw it away there and try to actually find the removal cards rather than keeping the shield block, which you may not have time to play.
Well, one thing's for sure is that turn was an absolute disaster to Tyler getting in so much free damage. And I hate to say with hindsight being 2020, but I really wish he had that Lightning Bloom for the survival of that turn.
That's true. That is true. Yeah, that would be a lot better.
It just come off the top, of course. But Che0nsu's problems still remain. Clearly, he prioritized getting that Ankar down so he could draw himself the risky skipper. And it will look like it's gonna be enough to deal with the board alongside 2-drop, 1-drop, and Sword and Board.
Yeah, it's close, right? It's not quite taking everything out here.
Yeah, it deals with the 6/6 at the very least, but loaded Python low-key being very annoying here.
And it's coming together. I said it, Gia, augmented porcupine, and then he proceeded to draw both survival of the fittest, one after the other. Tyler's deck is it's telling him something here.
That is one huge porcupine in the near future. But honestly, it might not even get to that point. Tyler is just putting so much pressure on Che0nsu. Ysera is very likely to stick next turn. And Che0nsu's only down to 13 now. Magtheridon, but no Bladestorm or Brawl to decide it.
Yeah, he's only got the one Bladestorm in the deck, of course, as well. So that makes it a little bit less likely he'll even find it, no matter how much he tries to cycle through.
So if he goes Shield Block, the only thing he can get is Brawl, pretty much. He can coin that out.
He could go for a swing of the weapon, get Risky Skipper, but he's still not activating the Magtheridon then, even with the cheapened Dread Corsair.
Just don't see it. I think he has to look for the Brawl.
Yeah.
If this board is brawling, technically he's not dead on this turn. And if we're going to be strict about ordering, if you are going to swing the end card, you want to get the tutored draw before the shield block.
Yes.
Any card in the deck draw.
Correct. That's something. He can survive for that little bit longer with that play.
From his perspective, at least,
Yes.
we're staring down the survival of the fittest in hand. Right, he does take the trade and puts down a taunt. Live to see another day.
Alright, you know, at first I was memeing when I was talking about the porcupine plus the survival of the fittest, but at this point, it's actually just insane. There's no silence effect. That could just kill Che0nsu straight out. I mean, obviously he's more worried about the 8-13 here that's smacking him in the face every turn, but that's the backup, alright? There's something else to follow up afterwards.
Yeah, it is pretty insane that the plan A is already unbeatable and then the plan B is just the biggest porcupine you've ever seen.
Okay, so what if we get the most god-tier Blastmaster boom ever to grace the earth here with Risky Skipper? Anything happening there?
I don't even think there are enough bombs to make it happen.
I think you're correct. Is that only one? Because he overwrote the weapon.
I think so. Best he can do is just skipper out some armor.
What now?
And it could be enough to get him over 16.
1, 2, 3. Okay.
Oh,
so he can clear the board with Coin Zephyrus. Okay.
Okay, very, very relevant.
There's a lot of expenditure coming down here, but the board is clear. That's the important thing. And he has the Wrench Caliber and the Blastmaster Boom to follow up for a reasonable mid-game plan, assuming he can survive.
All right, we're back on the porcupine plan. You're right there.
I never doubted. Never.
They're deciding to get this down instead of the Lake Thresher. It kind of shows you that he does want the Death Rattle on this. Or at least he wants a minion that Magtheridon is disincentivized to trade into, and therefore it can likely go face.
Ooh. This is damage coming together. He doesn't have all too many ways to activate the Grom anymore, because there's no Inner Rages, obviously, in the deck.
The porcupine activates the Grom.
You're not wrong, okay? You're not wrong there.
I mean, he has to kill the porcupine, otherwise he's dead to survival of the fittest. That's what we can see. Che0nsu might be thinking it's better just to leave it up and pray that the additional damage is not there.
You know what else porcupine kills? Bombs.
Boombots?
Yes, exactly. Oh, but he's not even trading.
Yep. I mean, Che0nsu, this is him to assume as well, which is that Tyler doesn't have 3 damage in hand, and he was taking those odds, but is going to be able to close out the game nice and clean here.
Yeah, it obviously looks suspect in this instance from Che0nsu, but I think you perfectly laid it out there. Che0nsu has to play to win. It's the classic conundrum in Hearthstone. You can't just play to survive for as long as possible and lose eventually. You've got to go in super aggressive and hope that Magtheridon or some extra bomb damage can get there. But in the end, Tyler does have that little bit too much explosiveness right at the start of the game. In no small part due to that exotic Mount Seller. That's a little bit unusual for him, a little bit of an exotic pick in his Druid, but just has been working pretty well so far for the Druid players.
Came down initially for just 3 beasts, but that in itself was a threatening enough board to warrant a brawl if it were there from Che0nsu, and the fact that it wasn't, I think Tyler got in over 10 extra damage from all of those minions, and was, I think, a lot closer to how you might expect the Druid versus Warrior matchup to go, but I definitely think that the inclusion of a Mount Seller at all, definitely even more so if there's 2, tilts that matchup way more in favor. If we're talking about just the natural amounts of threats that they have of the 2 guardian animals and Ysera, sometimes Warrior has enough time to actually outlast all of that.
That's right, and the important thing is it's not even necessarily the number of threats in Druid, it's just being able to consistently hit it early enough is the difference, because Warrior has enough removal to kill everything Druid is playing. They just don't have the time to find all of it. And the upshot of that is, of course, that the Druid on both sides, as we were predicting at the start, have now taken a win. And I think we can both agree that Che0nsu has found himself a matchup here that should be a little bit more what the Warrior was designed to take down.
And while we were praising the build of Druid for having more consistency in terms of threats for that matchup, I am worried about the consistency of Che0nsu's removal because, as we mentioned, there are so many one-ofs in the deck. The one-of Bladestorm in particular seems to be a little bit suspect to me, but the fact that he's in there has a very similar effect. A lot of the time you see Bladestorm used as single target removal post-brawl, or if your opponent just plays down a single threat, then Coerce could run a very, very similar role.
Oh, gee, this is such a nightmare of a hand already for Tyler, because this is the inherent problem in the deck that I keep bringing up here as Che0nsu manages to get the Ankar, which is great for him. The problem is that if you have all these weapon buffs and you're just doing it on your weapon, on your dagger, rather than the self-sharpening sword, it just doesn't feel like enough to kill Warrior. This isn't even going to come close as it currently stands.
Yeah, with only 2 charges on this, it is looking quite dicey for Tyler, and he's not able to start swinging right away because you want to keep the buffed weapon intact for the time that you draw into, like this card, Cutting Class, Steel Dancer, and even the Volterra Toxblade.
Tyler's not holding back though, and I think in this instance, he's absolutely right here. Drawing the cards cheap as possible is very, very important. Even if he is using up the Deadly Poison and the Toxblade, you take it, because this is, without a board clear for Che0nsu, a surprisingly threatening board to get this early in the game.
Yeah. Tyler just praying that the one of Bladestorm is not available quite yet, and Che0nsu doesn't have enough mana to go for the full clear at the moment. But I like that from Tyler, he doesn't swing that first charge, because if he's planning on going Deadly Poison again, it's extra 4 damage instead of extra 2. It's quite likely that we end up just seeing Steel Dancer though on curve for a 5-drop.
That was an interesting conundrum that Che0nsu was left with at the end, because I was looking kind of heavily there at just Shield Slam coming down as the last single mana on the turn to take out the Volpira Toxin Blade. But instead he's opting to take a little bit more armor gain, and of course develop the 1/1, but also tank quite a bit more damage.
Very unfortunate 5-drop from Tyler there, and I do agree that it looked fishy at first from Che0nsu the way he went about the turn, but I actually really like the line he went for, because the fact that he ended with all of these small annoying minions that trade well with the ones that he damaged on Tyler's end is a huge, because by the time the rogue has committed to buffing up their weapons, suddenly their small target have been expended, and the fact that everything was damaged means that backstab is not usable on those, and Tyler ends up trading himself into those minions.
You know what? I concede. the way it worked out there, Che0nsu, I'm sure, had a good idea that Tyler would have to trade into it. That was so gorgeous, the way that worked out. Holding onto the shield slam, gaining the extra armor. This is very, very strong from Che0nsu already.
And while it does look like it was a very unfortunate roll, I think in the grand scheme of things, even if we saw this become, say, a 5-5, that's already quite a high roll for a 5-cost minion, I would say. Che0nsu's still in a pretty good spot, able to pull out the second skipper and sitting on the second shield slam, and especially since he had Lord Bruv himself to pair with Risky Skipper.
It is looking good, I agree. However, if there was a glimmer of hope for Tyler, it's been found with the self-sharpening sword. This is just the first step on a journey that he has to make to have any chance here at all.
Yeah.
And the second self-sharpening sword is not the next step on that journey to recovery. But if he can find himself Secret Passage or the second cutting class, maybe we're in business here.
Yeah, you mentioned exactly what the next steps need to be. Anything else on its own, maybe Steel Dancer or possibly Dr. Krastenov. But aside from those, I think just the weapon without any minion support is nowhere near enough being able to contest Warrior's armor gain, and the fact that Che0nsu has free reign on developing the board. We could very well just see him drop a Deathwing next turn. Okay, that's
not bad.
Support.
Given that yesterday he got Wasteland Assassin and the Tiger as well.
Whoa!
Pretty good
These are
minions
amazing
hit.
5-drop.
Yeah.
Okay, that
You're
makes up
definitely
for
happy
the
with that.
buzzard.
I mean, this now just trades if he wants to go for Deathwing now.
It really does.
Got to point out as well that I'm a little bit disappointed. We are still yet to see a Mind Games Jandis where they deliberately make the better minion the spectral version that dies.
I think you're gonna stay disappointed then. Well, Che0nsu does have many ways of clearing. It does feel quite expensive to go for the Lord Barov Risky Skimper combo at this point. But I think with the way Tyler's deck is built, where there's very, very few minion threats, we're looking at second Steel Dancer essentially being the last wave of minions, and then you're just looking at a bunch of damage. I think it's fine for Che0nsu to use that a bit freely. But he could be thinking of a way to, say, isolate the 5-6, and that's a decent read you can make, given that, you know, most people do make the smaller minion into the Jandis illusion.
I think I actually like going for a Lord Brov line this turn, because my skepticism was at first that if you use the Skipper, you don't have an activator for Grom next turn, which is something that I'm quite looking at, of just closing out the game with that extra damage. But he has Sword and Board, so he can quite happily use Risky Skipper or Lord Barov into Sword and Board his own Barov here. Either way, basically the outcome is that he has an activator for Grom next turn to try and just absolutely put the clock on Tyler and finish the game.
I do like that he ended up going for the conservative play. No reason for him to take any extra damage there. I think that's the one way Che0nsu loses at this point, which is the runner-runner secret passages for Tyler. And oh my goodness, this line up perfectly against that My Mistress. Even passage of off the top. Will that be enough for Tyler? Not quite.
Yeah, he could have gone for the sap there and then like attacked into the Risky Skipper to potentially avoid lethal. But he quite clearly realizes that it's just done. Even if he's able to find something extra to go along with it next turn, it was verging on impossible for him to be able to win that game. So I think a respectable concede there. And for Che0nsu, finally he's finding the decks that he was supposed to be going up against. It's definitely a little bit harder for him against Tyler than it was for some of his opponents in the quarterfinal stage. Because he has a couple less aggro decks. You know, Tyler has the Rogue, but he's also got Druid, Priest, and Warrior, which are significantly slower. And Che0nsu, despite being 2-1 up here, still does have not the easiest climb to make to get through to the finals.
You know what makes me happy, though? Is that there's no more chance to see a Warrior Mirror in this series. We saw it once, Darek. It blew our minds, and I feel like we need to do a lot of testing before we can go back and cast that again. It does mean, however, that Che0nsu is required to queue up that Demon Hunter now, the deck that we featured, the deck that I feel was probably one of the most upbrings going into this week, and a deck that I feel will be seeing a resurgence in its popularity in the coming weeks. And it will, I think, find itself in a pretty good matchup versus that Rogue. But as for how it lines up against Warrior, I'd be skeptical.
Yeah, it's hard to say, right? Because they both do function fairly similarly. It's actually worth saying. They are both decks that have a lot of control tools, but they're also decks that rely on a lot of damage to be able to kill off their opponent. Bombs for the warrior, and just good old-fashioned weapons and plus attack damage on your hero for Illidan and the Demon Hunter. Your point being, I assume that the warrior is able to go kind of toe for toe on removal. Neither player is going to stick a board, and the bombs are too much to overcome for the Demon Hunter.
Yeah, I do think that, and also that the Demon Hunter healing, as we talked about the other day, only happens when it's damaged to begin with, whereas the warrior healing can happen incrementally throughout the entire game. The armor can just stack up and get out of the range of the weapon damage. But that matchup, potentially we could see it later, because first Tyler's going to try and get a win with his rogue. Trimester is a pretty good opening curve, but without any weapon synergy, he might have to rely on the secret passage at some point to get him that ever so crucial self-sharpening sword.
It's a pretty decent curve altogether, I think we can say. Just going 1-drop into 2-drop, the good old stealth package that is still absolutely present and very powerful in the archetype. And then I really wouldn't be surprised if we were just to see secret passage or even coin secret passage to try and find the self-sharpening sword and make the deck work.
However, with the draw of Deadly Poison, we could see Tyler deviate a little bit. Che0nsu there, prioritizing the Soul Shear to come down instead of Eldrazi Warblades, I think because he's trying to set up a nice Shard Shatter Mystic in the near future.
Yes.
That, of course, being able to deal with stealth minions.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. He needs to be able to fight back against, a whole suite of 3 health minions. We saw just last game with double Dread Corsair and the Volpira Toxin Blade how insanely powerful a 3 damage AoE would be.
And using the Mage Hunter pretty liberally here just to get rid of that Death Rattle, I think makes a lot of sense. There aren't that many other silenced targets in the deck outside of what's generated by Tyler's cards like Steel Dancer. Alright, great statted 3-drop for Tyler, but Che0nsu did just top deck a nice 1-drop to put a couple more Spirit... I keep calling this different things. Soul Fragments in the deck.
Yes. Soul Shards, Spirit Fragments, Soul Fragments. Many different things are said, only one is correct, and I will never get it right either.
Well, there's a clear here for Che0nsu, Shard Shatter, I-Beam, Hero Power.
I grow
it's a lot of resources used, so we could see him go for the Eldrazi Chaos Strike and essentially take net 0 damage as he kills off the Steel Dancer.
Yeah, I'm much more in favor of this line. It leaves something in play, but it activates the Warblades, and those are now in place so you can start healing up on the following turns. And it holds back on the Shard Shatter Mystic, which could be incredibly powerful on this turn.
Yikes, Desert Obelisk. Dr. Kasanov is great, but it has nothing to rush into.
Right.
And yes, the saving of the Mystic will come in huge here for Che0nsu. Can get a full clear.
Can I apply the same logic that you did yesterday, Gia, on why Battle Rage for 0 was great in the Control Warrior mirror of Desert Obelisk is great here because anything it was would die anyway, so it's the nuts because you don't want it.
That is completely different, Darrow. You are actively creating space in your hand for better cards by getting a playable card. No.
The exact same argument.
So we should have this argument off stream.
Agreed. Agreed.
In any case, Che0nsu saving that Shard Shatter Mystic is huge for him there. Can reset the board. He still has a very healthy amount of HP left. Tyler re-rolling the hand. If he gets any more minion presence or even cutting class, pretty good.
Yeah, this is starting to shape up very nicely. The mana is not quite perfect because he can't get down the Dread Corsair and then the sword after, so I think he's probably just going to have to prioritize the sword, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Just swing and then re-equip the sword.
Yeah.
And he did pick up as the non-secret passage draws, so they'll stay in his hand, the Spymaster's Greyheart Sage. So that's cycle that can continue.
So many options.
There's a question of whether he wants to swing the self-sharpening immediately, but I don't think that he's in the mode where he's just trying to beat Che0nsu in the next 2 turns. I think he needs to eke out additional value, or damage in this case.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Oh, he's forgoing the self-sharpening swords completely. That is very surprising to me.
Well, we got to look at the situation that Che0nsu is necessarily in here, because generally, you know, I've been saying self-sharpening sword is the card you want. That's how you make the deck work. Che0nsu's low on cards here, though. He's used a few of his resources. Obviously, if a Blade Dance was to come down here, Tyler could pretty much just pack things up straight away. But he's making the bet that that isn't there. And even with Shard Shatter Mystic coming into hand, these minions are going to survive for a turn.
But that does become a conundrum for Che0nsu now, because he played this Che0n, I think was aiming it at a minion, and now he's held back a little bit. It would be kind of telegraphing to Tyler what the draw was if he suspiciously held back on the Eldraki Warblades and the trade there, so I think it's fine that he ends up going for the defensive route anyway, and he can just use Mystic or whatever comes down this turn, which unlucky for Che0nsu is just draw after draw for Tyler.
Yeah, it's a little bit awkward here, of course, because Tyler is actively refilling the hand. But the question really becomes for Che0nsu. I guess it's not really much of a question. I was going to say, should it be Magtheridon plus Shard Shatter Mystic, but Sociologist Militia maybe changes that equation.
Yeah, the Magtheridon's a bit fishy because of Sap being a big threat, and the effect of Magtheridon clearing off your Shard Shatter. If Tyler does have the Sap, it's kind of like back to square one, no net initiative gained. But the Militia does give nearly a full board, and Tyler is very mad.
Yeah, that's definitely not what you wanted to see. I like this a lot from Che0nsu because, you know, they was thinking to go Shard Shatter this turn without Magtheridon, with Magtheridon, however you want to go about it, and then follow up with Sociologist Militia. But it just means that it's proactively in play. Tyler kind of has to respond to this. The line of just going all face and hoping the weapons can get there won't work because he doesn't have self-sharpening sword. It's not enough charges on his weapon to get there.
Yeah, and even if he had the sword, I don't think he's able to outpace. Che0nsu's just threatening, how much is this, 14 per turn? That is 2 turn setup from Che0nsu. It's just not happening for Tyler. And he is forced to therefore clear off some minions.
Kind of awkward again for Che0nsu because he doesn't want to have to destroy his own board in order to be able to get there, but Skull of Gul'dan will significantly open up his options yet again.
Nearly back to full health is Che0nsu. Oh, never mind. Completely back to full health is Che0nsu. And he's under very little pressure. He knows Tyler had to be the one to trade last turn, so completely happy just to fill up the board. Tempo Mage Hunter, why not?
Yep, I like this a lot because the rest of his deck now, we are looking at there being the damage cards in there. Marrow Slicer, Soul Shard, Lapidary, Twin Slicers in there as well. His deck is just almost all burn damage.
May I have this dance?
Tyler praying for some miracle 3-drop to help him out. Not quite it though.
Yeah, trading. Not what this deck wants to be doing at this point in the game at all.
Tyler has diligently held on to the sap, so Che0nsu not necessarily gonna feel good about playing Magtheridon. But with this the Marrow Slicer drawn, yeah, might as well just send everything face. He's not dying anytime soon.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. There's just great recognition, I think, from Che0nsu last turn and carrying that on this turn, that he is the aggressor. It may not seem like it at first glance, but he can not only go face here, he can also find the Blade Dance to completely shut Tyler out of the game. Not even close.
Extremely one-sided is this, and that's gonna be the series, I believe.
I give up.
Yeah.
That's going to be the
throws
series.
in the tower.
He does. That was a very dominant display from Che0nsu, who, after a clean sweep over both Friday and today, ends up in the finals. It's been a great run for him, as I was saying again and again, on ladder and here so far in APAC GM. And I think, you know, you and I have been talking about it so much already during his games, but it's just a very unique lineup from him and seemingly an extremely powerful one. This Demon Hunter, I just think, is so well positioned.
Yeah, I completely agree. Didn't quite get there for Possessi, but I think overall, in terms of reading what the rest of the field could be bringing, we just saw how rogues could fall prey to not just warrior that control Demon Hunter, and lots of people were bringing rogue. I think it would be a similar story for Tempo Mages, although that deck does have other ways to cheat out the win here and there. But on average, I feel like control decks would have a leg up against those. And while that is very painful for Tyler, he still goes out in third to fourth place, which means he earns 5 points going into this first week of the Swiss. And it's nothing to scoff at whatsoever, because if you finish in the bottom half, you get 3 points or less.
Yeah, you really want to be up there at the top, and it would be a nice change of pace from Tyler. Really doesn't want to end up in Division B again, because despite doing fairly well there in Season 1, once he did get to Division B, it still meant that he was not in with much of a chance, it's got to be said, of getting through to the World Championships. But if he can carry on this week with another couple of top fours, maybe even a little bit higher, getting all the way through to the finals, I think Tyler is still a very strong contender given how much he's playing.